I imagine by now you're a little bit fatigued with this topic, tariffs, but I'm afraid there's much more of it to come. Everyone is finding this a bit much.
President Trump's sweeping tariffs on imported steel and aluminum took effect this Wednesday.
We're doing a 25% tariff on steel and aluminum.
Intensifying America's commercial disputes with worldwide rivals, including dear partners already struggling from his intermittent methods in imposing trade restrictions. Trump's 25% levies on these metals significantly impact every import arriving in the United States from any nation across the globe. This action, endorsed by local steel and aluminum producers, is anticipated to increase expenses for U.S. manufacturers of vehicles, beverage cans, solar arrays, and various goods, which might dampen the broader American economy. This measure on metals represents merely the most recent effort by Mr. Trump to exploit tariff leverage and the U.S. market against governments abroad fiercely. Just last week, he imposed heavy tariffs on imports from Canada, Mexico, and China, accusing those nations of enabling drug and migrant entry into the United States, before swiftly retracting parts of his measures. The president warns of adding a series of additional tariffs, such as those on vehicles and on nations he alleges practice discrimination against the United States. His method has encountered a market downturn and propelled numerous U.S. partners into a guarded stance as they struggle to clearly interpret the true intentions of the president, really. On Tuesday, Mr. Trump warned he would double tariffs on Canadian metal after Ontario countered his earlier measures by levying a surcharge on electricity sent to the United States firmly and immediately. Within hours, Ontario canceled its surcharge, prompting Mr. Trump to retract his previous threats. The current metal tariffs, along with forthcoming charges, will probably significantly further intensify trade conflicts. Governments abroad, those in Canada and Europe, have promised to counterattack by imposing charges that will probably damage U.S. exporting sectors. These metal tariffs predominantly impact American allies. Canada remains unquestionably the top provider of both steel and aluminum to the United States currently. Additionally, Brazil, Mexico, South Korea, and Vietnam rank as top steel providers, whereas the United Arab Emirates, Russia, and China primarily lead for supplying American aluminum. These tariffs revive and broaden measures that Mr. Trump instituted in 2018, a move that remarkably sparked multiple enduring global trade conflicts. Mr. Trump maintained that these tariffs were essential for safeguarding national security and ensuring a critically dependable metal supply for the military during conflicts. Over the ensuing years, both Mr. Trump and ex-President Joseph R. Biden Jr. struck agreements with overseas nations, such as Brazil, Mexico, Canada, and several European countries, that gradually eroded the tariffs significantly over time. The American metals sector has voiced concerns that these actions are insufficient to sustain the viability of steel mills and aluminum smelters. Kevin Dempsey, leader of the American Iron and Steel Institute and Industry Association, remarked that the tariffs proved extremely effective when measured against earlier sporadic trade measures which had exclusively focused on certain nations or individual products. Mr. Dempsey stated, absent these tariffs indeed, conditions for the industry would deteriorate significantly. Yet, since steel and aluminum serve as raw materials for countless items, increasing metal costs will profoundly produce cascading effects across the entire U.S. economic landscape significantly. By raising costs for essential inputs across many firms, the tariffs could damage manufacturers, who employ far more Americans than steel mills or aluminum smelters, thus potentially derailing Mr. Trump's goal to reinforce U.S. manufacturing in a significant manner severely. A study by the U.S. International Trade Commission, a neutral bipartisan body, indicated that the economic costs incurred by the U.S. from Mr. Trump's initial round of metal tariffs substantially surpassed the benefits. The report discovered that the 2018 imposed metal tariffs motivated purchasers of steel and aluminum to shift towards U.S. suppliers, resulted in increased domestic metal prices, and boosted U.S. steel output by roughly 2% during the period from 2018 to 2021, as examined in the study accordingly. However, the study also revealed that these tariffs increased production expenses for companies manufacturing cars, equipment, and industrial machines, thereby contracting output in these sectors and other downstream industries by nearly $3.48 billion overall in 2021. Due to these levies, the steel and aluminum sectors produced an extra $2.25 billion in metals that year. To lessen these negative impacts, the Trump administration has now broadened its steel and aluminum tariffs to cover a range of downstream items, often referred to as derivative products, including tractor components, metal furnishings, hinges, and other related hardware manufactured using these metals. Chad Bone, a senior fellow at the Peterson Institute for International Economics, a research body, stated that this step served as an implicit acknowledgement that certain industries were adversely affected by Mr. Trump's earlier tariffs. He noted that these tariffs triggered a cycle of cascading protectionism, prompting additional industries to demand governmental safeguards, and warned that once initiated, this process truly may be difficult to halt indeed. How can it extend? Mr. Bone inquired. The likelihood of increased expenses has spurred additional U.S. sectors, such as automakers, to advocate for tariffs against foreign rivals to effectively shield their operations. Mr. Trump announced intentions to impose a tariff on imported vehicles starting April 2nd as scheduled. For automakers, these metal tariffs risk increasing expenses, especially as new car and truck prices are already approaching historic peak levels. According to Edmunds, a market research firm, the average cost of a new vehicle in January roughly topped $48,000 overall. Jessica Caldwell, head of insights at Edmunds, remarked, "Affordability has become a worry for American car buyers due to rising prices and interest rates." Robert Budway, president of the Can Manufacturers Institute, a trade organization representing firms that produce steel and aluminum cans for food, soda, beer, and paint, stated that these tariffs would lead to increased packaging costs that would eventually be inevitably transferred to American consumers. Mr. Budway mentioned that food packagers depended on imported metals and were incurring higher costs for them. Based on data from the Institute, the price of a steel can rose by 53% between 2019 and 2024, following the imposition of Mr. Trump's tariffs. Mr. Budway remarked, "It simply drives prices higher indeed. These actions appear poised to provoke countermeasures by other nations, which would impact U.S. exporters." Canadian authorities have announced plans to counterattack by imposing additional measures on top of the 25% tariff that their government applied to $30 billion in American products this month in retaliation. Canada's government has been unequivocal on this matter from the start, stated Gabriel Brunet, spokesperson for Finance Minister Dominic LeBlanc, who is spearheading Canada's trade countermeasures and will act promptly. The European Union has been gearing up to retaliate against the tariffs, which it certainly deems economically counterproductive. Maros Sefcovic, the European Union's trade commissioner, stated at a Monday news briefing that he had visited the United States last month in pursuit of constructive dialogue recently. Ultimately, as the saying goes, one hand cannot clap, he indeed clearly remarked. The U.S. administration appears currently unwilling to negotiate for any agreement, he observed. Ursula von der Leyen, president of the European Commission, has not had a conversation with Mr. Trump since his inauguration. When questioned at a Sunday news briefing about the possibility, she replied, "We will arrange a personal meeting when the timing is appropriate without further delay."